Good evening. Welcome back to another edition of Why Do We? We're having folks ask questions on why we do things we do, why we do things at Wisconsin Rapids UMC the way we do, why we do things as United Methodists the way we do, why we do things as Protestants as we do, or why we do things as Christians. And so if you have a question, feel free to ask, to pass it along. I got a couple more questions in the hopper, but a couple weeks will run out. I know in an email that went out today, I talked about this evening was going to be about the saints, but what I've run into is that it was too long. So I've got to break it down a little bit, and didn't want to rush that. So I'm going to do a different question tonight. We can look forward to a couple week discussion about the saints, and the specific question is, why do we not revere the saints like the Catholics do? And I think that's a good question, and as Protestants we don't always talk about the saints, and we have a little different understanding, so we're going to get to that in a couple weeks. And so our why do we question today is why do we have committees? Now, might be maybe a simple question. Work has to get done, administration has to get done, decisions have to be made. But I'll tell you a story. In every church, every denomination, they're set up a little bit differently. And even within the United Methodist Church, as I've served multiple different churches, even in between those churches, they operate a little differently, just depending on history and maybe the number of folks that are available, that sort of thing. So I remember once there was a big decision that was going to be made at a church I was serving, and the decision was all about pews. Yeah, you heard me right. It was about pews. You see, in this particular sanctuary, the pews seemed to be pretty close together. There wasn't a lot of room for maneuvering. Now, there's generally not a lot of room, but I remember my sister came to visit, and she's pretty tall with long legs, and she said she was very uncomfortable and she'd never sat in pews like this before. And so I began to investigate, what it would take to maybe take out a couple pews and to move the space of the pews out a little bit more. And I was very, very surprised at the amount of conversation this kicked up. But what happened was it had come to the council's attention. Now, the church council is the governing body. They oversee everything that's going on in the church. They make sure that all the other groups and committees are focused on moving in the same direction. And so they're the top of the list, the main, or the committee that oversees all the others, really, in the church. And so the council then passed it on to the trustees. And the trustees is the committee that takes care of the buildings and the grounds. And so because this was a part of the building and moving stuff around, the trustees had to investigate what this might take. And so they went, and a couple of trustees, they went to some different churches and measured in between pews, and did find that our pews were pretty close together. And as it went on, we had a newer trustee chair, and so he was still learning the ropes, and I had been gone for a couple weeks. And when I got back, the first Sunday that I was back, he stood up and made an announcement, and he said, made the comment that we're going to have a church vote on what to do. And so I had to tell him after church that we don't operate that way, that our committees, whether it be church council or the trustees or the staff parish relations committee or SPRC or finance committee, these are the main ones. In our church, we also have a missions committee. Sometimes there's a Christian ed committee, and on. There can be lots of committees. But these committees are charged with the task of their area. Finance is going to make decisions about finance and pass that along to council, and council makes sure, yep, that's what we need to do. That's how we're going to move forward. Same with the staff parish relations committee. That's like our personnel committee, or our HR, if you will. And so they're going to make those decisions. And so back to the chair of trustees, he said we're going to have a church vote on what to do. So I had to tell him that's not how we operate. We have these committees to make decisions. Now, we can get input from other folks, but ours is a structure that we vote in leaders to make the decisions for us. And so when do we vote in leaders? We vote in our leadership at Charge Conference. Typically, this is sometime between the end of October and November of the year. And And so at Charge Conference, we okay the leadership for the following year. And again, this is something that'll vary from place to place, but typically folks are supposed to be on a 3-year cycle. A lot of times, and I know at Wisconsin Rapids, we've got a lot of folks who've been serving a long time, a lot longer than 3 years, in their respective positions. But anyhow, so I stood up the next week in church and explained this to folks that there's not going to be a church vote, but we'd have a meeting to discuss the issue of the pews, to talk about what we discovered and going forward. So this next week, right after that meeting, I was approached and I had a gentleman ask, well, why does 8 to 10, 12 people get to make the decision for the whole church? And this has been a lifelong member of the Methodist Church, and he was not aware of how our administrative structure worked. And so we talked about it, said this is why we vote in people, this is why it's important to be at Charge Conference, to know who's going to be leading these committees and on these committees, and this is why there's a vote. So I'm not sure he was all that happy. I think he wanted to have a vote in this particular thing, and all this next week, my time was consumed with the pews. There was a lot of folks that were upset that these pews might even be moved, and for various reasons. And for the most part, there was a couple people that were pretty rude about it when expressing their opinion. But for the most part, folks gave their opinion and respected others' opinions. In the end, the trustees voted not to move the pews, and that's because of the cost involved. The way the carpet was cut around the pews, and to make everything handicap accessible, it was going to cost a lot of money. So we ended up leaving it the way it was and went on with our business. But for folks in that particular church, it was an interesting way to see how the committees can work together. But all in all, we have these different committees to take a focused look at different areas of the church life and to make sure that we're all pointed in the same direction. And again, that's what the council is for, to make sure that all the committees are heading in the same direction, that the trustees and what the trustees are working on coincides with what the mission of the church is and what our next steps might be at the church, and make sure then the finance committee comes in to make sure that the finances are going well, that money's being raised appropriately, so they'd have to work with the trustees to make sure that funds are raised for building projects. And then the SPRC makes sure that the pastor, myself, or any other staff that we're doing what we're supposed to do to move forward as a church and to lead the church in a certain way. So why do we have committees? We have committees to get some work done, and it's not always pretty work or glorious work, but it's very, very important work. And so I thank those Wisconsin Rapids United Methodist Church who've served for a long time, who've maxed out or not maxed out, but been well past their 3-year time limit, but they serve faithfully. And for those this year, we've got several new members of committees this year, but with the pandemic hitting us, we've not met like normal, and so a lot of the committees haven't met yet, or maybe just once or twice, and so we'll get everybody on board. So, but anyways, committee meetings, sometimes they get a bad rap, sometimes the stereotype is true, but it's it's important work, and we're working at making the meetings very meaningful and making sure that we take steps forward every time as a church. So hope this helps. Have a great weekend. Can't wait to see you guys Sunday. Bye-bye.